The Hadith of the slave girl, Hadith al-Jariyah. Understanding the Hadith of the slave girl as narrated by Muslim is important. Yani, understanding this Hadith broadly is important, and in particular as narrated by Imam Muslim. But it has several versions. That's why it says as narrated by Muslim. But in order to understand it as narrated by Muslim, one also needs to understand the other versions of it also. Have some awareness of those other versions. It is one to which the likeners, the God comparers, the anthropomorphists refer with consistent frequency to mislead people. Yani Muslims' version in particular. Not only Muslims' version, they also would refer to some other versions, but usually it's Muslims' version that they refer to. And what they often do is mix Muslims' version with some other version. So to support their agenda in particular, not to be accurate in their report, but to strengthen their fallacy. In Sahih Muslim is the story of a man who had a slave woman grazing his ghanam, sheep or goats. When a wolf got one, he smacked her, then regretted that. So he went to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who scolded him for that. Yani, he told the Prophet about what he did. And so he said, "O Messenger of Allah, should I set her free? Should I emancipate her?" The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Bring her to me." So he brought her to him. فقال لها أين الله؟ قالت في السماء. قال من أنا؟ قالت أنت رسول الله. قال أعتقها فإنها مؤمنة. That's the text of Muslim's version there. Yani, the relevant part. That hadith has several things in it. So he said to her, Ain Allah? She said, Fi sama. He said, Who am I? She said, You are the messenger of Allah. He said, Free her, for she is a believer. It's easy for you to notice here we didn't translate these words, Ain Allah and Fi sama. In Arabic, the term Aina is an ism. It's a noun that sometimes is posed to state a condition and sometimes is posed for interrogation. Yani either Aina is a conditional noun or it's an interrogative noun that means for asking a question. Like here in the hadith, it's interrogative or interrogatory. The first, if it's a condition, is like to say, Aina ma tajlis ajlis. Wherever you sit, I sit. Or where you sit, I sit. So that's a condition. The second is sometimes an inquiry about the place and sometimes an inquiry about the status. So the second one is an inquiry. That means a question. Either about the place or the status, the makan or the makana. So it translates as where. Aina translates as where. And the English word where, it asks about a status, just like the Arabic word aina asks about a status. Aina asks about a place or a status, and where in English asks about a place or a status. So that's the hadith. That's the relevant part of the hadith. They, those Wahhabis, they thought that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked her about the location of Allah. And that she said, in the sky or above the heaven. That's what they thought. So in terms of literal translation, it would be in the sky. You might find some Wahhabis who say that. But in terms of their actual conviction, they would say, she was saying, he's above the heaven. Which is not the literal translation of the words in the hadith. They did not learn the fundamentals of the belief because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not contradict the Quran or the religion. Yani, their interpretation makes the Prophet contradict the religion. their interpretation of the hadith. Merging the narrations of this hadith shows that he tested her about her conviction in Allah to determine if she was a believer or a pagan. Not that he was asking her about a place, which is a location, a place which here means a location. Al-Bayadli said, the fourth point is that he, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, wanted to test her. Does she confess that the Creator, the doer of all that He willed, the majestically high, He is indeed Allah, whom, if the supplicating one supplicates to Him, He faces the sky, He directs Himself to the sky? This is what the Prophet ﷺ was trying to ascertain by his question. Is she a monotheist who directs herself to the sky when supplicating, like the monotheists do, without them believing that Allah is in the sky, though? This is what the Prophet's question refers to, and the acceptance of her answer refers to. He accepted her answer by saying, free her, she's a believer. So this is what his question refers to, and his acceptance of her answer, like in An-Nawawi's explanation of Sahih Muslim. And this is what Abu Hanifa signaled to when he said, Allah the Exalted is referred to by using terms of highness, not lowness. So merging the narrations of this hadith shows that he tested her about her conviction in Allah, to determine if she was a believer or a pagan. Not that he was asking her about a place. We'll put the word here, location. I think the word location is even more explicit than the word place, because place means also status. Place can mean location or it can mean status, because you say, what place are we in? What place are they in? It means what's their status? What's their ranking? I don't think you say, what's their location? And you mean, what's their ranking? Imam Malik, who is by consensus more knowledgeable than Muslim, even in the science of hadith, narrated a stronger narration of this hadith with other terms. فقال لها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أتشهدين أن لا إله إلا الله قالت نعم قال أتشهدين أني رسول الله قالت نعم قال أعتقها. He said to her, do you testify that no one is God except Allah? She said, yes. He said, do you testify that I am the messenger of Allah? She said, yes. He said, free her. This is how Muslims' version should be understood, because this is the way to test one's belief according to the known rules. One is not judged as a Muslim for declaring that God is in heaven. Sheikh Abdul Rahman said that Sheikh Abdullah was challenged by some Wahhabis. They came to debate with him. So they told him the hadith of the slave girl. So the Sheikh said to them, if a Yahudi told you, Allahu fi sama, would you judge him as a believer? He said that, so they went silent. So then the Sheikh said, answer. They didn't answer. So then the Sheikh said, intaha, it's over. It's clear? The Sheikh said, وَوَجْهُ الْمُعَارَضَةِ أَنَّ حَدِيثَ الْجَارِيَةِ فِيهِ الِاكْتِفَاءُ بِقَوْلِ اللَّهُ فِي السَّمَاءِ لِلْحُكْمِ عَلَى قَائِلِهِ بِالْإِسْلَامِ. The Sheikh said, the point of conflict, the issue that's against the rules of the religion, is that the hadith of the slave girl suffices with saying God is in heaven for judging whoever says it with Islam. He means, and Allah knows best, despite some scholars giving this hadith a ta'wil, a reinterpretation, Despite some scholars interpreting this hadith by other than its apparent meaning and authenticating it. They said, this hadith of Muslim, this version narrated by Muslim, that he asked her, Ain Allah? So she said, Fi sama, that it means he was asking her, how do you glorify Allah? And she said, Fi sama. And they said, this means he is most glorified. So then he said, free her, she is a believer. And then those scholars who gave this explanation said, therefore the hadith is authentic. It is narrated by Muslim, it is authentic, and it's not explained as it appears. The Shaykh saying, no, still not really authentic, because even according to this reinterpretation, he still judged her as a Muslim only because she said fi sama, and that's not the rule. The rule is to judge a person as a Muslim for saying the Shahada. So the reinterpretation, the ta'wil, doesn't save the hadith from criticism. So what the Shaykh means is that despite some scholars giving this hadith an alternative interpretation and authenticating it with its alternative interpretation, meaning, of course, they're leaving the words the way Muslim narrated it. And then they interpreted the words that Muslim narrated with an interpretation that's not the apparent meaning of the hadith. And they said, and it's authentic like Muslim said. Shaykh saying, no, it's not. Because even according to reinterpreting the hadith to mean that when the Prophet ﷺ asked her, Ain Allah, he asked her about the makana, the rank or the status, and not the makan, the place. And when she said fi sama, she meant high in status, not occupying the sky. That's their interpretation, their alternative interpretation or reinterpretation. The Shaykh is saying there's still the problem of judging her as a Muslim for what does not validate faith according to the known rules. Hence, these meanings work in Arabic, yes. The reinterpretation they gave, it does work according to the Arabic. But judging her as a believer for those words has no way to be correct. Let's see these footnotes here. So when the Prophet ﷺ asked her, Ain Allah, he asked her about the makana, the status or the rank. That's the reinterpretation some scholars gave about the question, Ain Allah. Al-Bayaldi said, so the Prophet ﷺ said to her, are you a believer? A mu'minatun ant? She said, yes. So he said, Ain Allah, asking about the status of the highness and the highness, asking about the status and the highness over the slaves, which is the highness of dominance and subjugation, and signaling to the fact that if the slaves supplicated to him, they direct themselves towards the sky. The apparent meaning is not what is intended. So that's how some scholars explain the hadith. But here, Al-Bayaldi didn't make the comment that the Shaykh made, nor did An-Nawawi, which is that, however, it's not valid to judge her as a Muslim merely for saying fi sama. Here's another footnote. Then Al-Bayaldi said, and she pointed to the sky. That's another version of the hadith. That's not Muslim's version of the hadith. Muslim's version of the hadith is that she answered verbally, fi sama. In another version, فَأَشَارَتْ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ, she pointed to the sky. Now, according to that version, what does it mean? Also, that has a reinterpretation as a sign referring to the highness, to the highest status. Just as it is said, so-and-so is fi sama, in the sky, meaning that he has a high status, as mentioned in the book At-Taqdis by Ar-Razi, Asasul Taqdis. And he said, free her, for she is a believer. But like we're saying, which is what the Shaykh is saying, but Saying she's a believer just for pointing to the sky is not the rule. Just like it's not the rule to say she's a believer for saying he's in the sky. It's not the rule to say she's a believer for saying he's in the sky, even if it means high status. Like, it's not the rule to say that someone's a believer for saying God has a high status. It's not the rule for saying that someone's a believer. It's not the rule to say someone's a believer for saying fi sama. And it's not the rule to say someone's a believer for pointing to the sky. So that means there's still something problematic in the hadith, even with a ta'wil, even with an alternative interpretation. This version, not Malik's version. Malik's version is compliant. He asked her about the shahada. Do you testify that no one is God but Allah? She said yes. Do you testify that I am the messenger of Allah? She said yes. That's compliant. But in that version, he didn't say she's a believer. He just said free her. So when she answered fi sama, she meant high in status, not occupying the sky. But there's still the problem of judging her as a Muslim for what does not validate faith according to the known rules. Hence, these meanings work in Arabic, but judging her as a believer for those words has no way to be correct. Yani, that needs an explanation itself too. So who will offer that explanation? Sheikh said, basically saying doesn't have an explanation. That's why he said here it's conflicting. He said, وَوَجْهُ الْمُعَارَضَةِ. Mu'arada means conflict. That means against the rules. The Prophet ﷺ ordered us to judge someone as a believer upon hearing the two shahadas from him. When he said this hadith, أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يشهدوا أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله. I was commanded to fight the people until they testify that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. In the narration of Ibn Hibban, it's narrated, فَقَالَ مَنْ رَبُّكَ قالت الله قال من أنا قالت أنت رسول الله. The Prophet ﷺ asked her, who is your Lord? She said, Allah. He said, who am I? She said, you are the messenger of Allah. This one is also compliant, like Malik's narration is compliant. There's no need for a reinterpretation here. Malik's version is compliant and Ibn Hibban's version is compliant. Muslim's version is not compliant even with a reinterpretation. But it's interesting that, I don't know any scholar who pointed out that conflict other than the Shaykh rahimahullah. Maybe some did. I haven't seen many books like a big scholar would have. It could be that the Shaykh is actually logging and basically agreeing with and saying what has been said before him. But I don't know that anyone else said that. So if anyone comes across anyone who said that point there, that even with the reinterpretation there's still a conflict, then share it, please. In Al-Bayhaqi's rendition is the same question. Who is your Lord? But the one who came to the Prophet ﷺ was a woman. So we should actually grab Al-Bayhaqi's rendition. If I'm not mistaken, it's in his Sunan. So that we can at least make a footnote here and document it, put it here so the students of knowledge and the people who want references can see it. In a fifth narration, the slave woman could not speak at all. She was a mute. All of these narrations are sahih except the first, the narration of Muslim, according to our Shaykh and others, like Zumari. Muslim's version is not sahih. And the last, in which she was a mute, that one also is weak. Some scholars like Al-Ghumari judged this hadith as weak. A small portion of hadiths narrated by Muslim, about 50, are weak according to some scholars like Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Ash-Shafi'i, and As-Suyuti. Because of the status of this hadith, Al-Bukhari did not put it in his Sahih. According to him, it did not reach that level to be included in his book. But he did narrate it elsewhere, and not this part that we're discussing. The specific weakness of this hadith is ibtirab. Ibtirab is inconsistency, clashing. The hadith narrated by the same narrator, different times, with different chains, in a way that they do not comply with each other, or narrated at different times with different texts in a way that they do not comply with each other, is called muttarib, disordered hadith. This is, of course, when the narrations have equal levels and there is no way to join them and put them all in compliance. This type of hadith is weak and is a subdivision of the defective hadith. But if we're going to say that this hadith has inconsistency, has ibtirab, that means we're not going to give the other versions an alternative interpretation. The versions of the hadith as they stand are in conflict with each other. If you just take the version that says, "Do you testify that no one is God but Allah?" and compare it to the version that says, "Where is Allah?" They are so far from each other. Very, very far from each other. They're so far that when we say to a Wahhabi, if we were to say to a Wahhabi, that version of Muslim, it means he was asking her about her glorification of Allah. He'll say, "What? What kind of a stretch are you attempting to make here? Look how far you're going out of your way to explain the hadith away." If it were me, instead of just giving him this reinterpretation to say, "Ain Allah" here means such and such, my approach would be just to immediately go to Malik's version of the hadith. I would say to him, this hadith doesn't comply with the fundamentals. Malik's version is the version that complies with the fundamentals. Because even if, like we just said, even if you want to explain Ain Allah to mean this and Fi Sama to mean that, you still have the issue of explaining how he judged her as a believer for just saying Fi Sama. So then, yeah, some scholars said that, but how about we just resort to another version of the hadith and push this one to the side altogether? But our doing so is not because we don't like the hadith. It's not because we're picking and choosing, rather. It's not simply we're picking and choosing, saying we don't want that version, we want this version. It's because there are rules, and we have to interpret things in accordance with those rules. The way the Wahhabis are approaching this is as if there aren't any rules. And so we're just going to interpret each thing one by one, piece by piece, without any regard to any rules, any established rules. This hadith is inconsistent in its texts and chains. Therefore, this hadith is not proof in the matters of the creed. Most scholars said that if a hadith does not reach the level of mashhur, that means at least 3 narrators at every level, it cannot be relied upon in the matters of the creed. This one does not reach the level of shuhra, meaning it's not mashhur. The famous hadith is the hadith narrated by at least 3 in each stage of narrators. Let alone tawatur. This hadith is not mutawatir, and a Wahhabi will lie to you to tell you it is so. I talked to an Arab Wahhabi once, and when I started to explain to him the inconsistency in the hadith, he told me, "La, this hadith is mutawatir." I told him it's not mutawatir. And then our conversation digressed into mustalah, hadith terminology. Then when he found me capable of talking about hadith terminology, he abandoned his attempt to say that the hadith is mutawatir. Tawatur, which is the highest level of authenticity. And it is not a single narration that is authentic without dispute. That's a condition that some scholars said. Those who said, well, to be a proof in the creed, it doesn't have to be tawatur. That's correct anyway. It is correct to say a hadith doesn't have to be tawatur to be proof in the creed. But some said it needs to be mashhur though. It's not mashhur, this hadith of the slave girl. And some said doesn't even have to be mashhur. It just, even if it's a single narration, it has to be authentic without dispute. Meaning no one disputes its authenticity. And this hadith is not authentic without dispute. Therefore, it cannot be evidence in the creed. Imam Abu Hanifa explained the hadith of the slave girl in Al-Fiqh al-Absat when he said, وَأَنَّهُ تَعَالَى يُدْعَى مِنْ أَعْلَى لَا مِنْ أَسْفَلِ لأن الأسفل ليس من وصف الربوبية والألوهية في شيء. Allah the Exalted is invoked by using terms of highness, not lowness, because lowness is in no way an ascription of lordship and godhood. وعليهما روي في الحديث أن رجلا أتى إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بأمة سوداء فقال وجب علي عتق رقبة أفتجزئ هذه. According to that is what was narrated in the hadith that a man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a black slave woman and said, "It is obligatory upon me to free a believer. Is this slave woman sufficient?" فقال لها النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to her, أمؤمنة أنت? Are you a believer? فقالت نعم. She said yes. فقال أين الله? So he said, أين الله? فأشارت إلى السماء. So she pointed to the sky. فقال أعتقها فإنها مؤمنة. He said, free her, for she is a believer. Al-Bayaldi explained these words of Abu Hanifa in Isharatul Maram, and we put his commentary in the footnotes. We've been reading them. So let's catch some more footnotes here. So Abu Hanifa said, Allah the Exalted is invoked by using terms of highness, not lowness, because lowness is in no way an ascription of lordship and godhood. What Abu Hanifa alluded to by saying Allah the Exalted is invoked by using terms of highness is what would be the description of he who is called upon. Exalted is he, of the attributes of majesty, greatness, godhood, and independence, not lowness, because lowness, i.e. the signification of lowness, is in no way an description of lordship and godhood and greatness and highness of dominance. Like you don't say, oh, God is so low. You don't say, oh, God, you who's so low, for example. You say, oh, you who's so high, meaning majestic. Abu Hanifa says, and according to that, Al-Bayaldi explains, according to that means according to his being invoked by using terms of highness and being ascribed with the attributes of majesty and greatness, is what was narrated in the hadith that a man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Al-Bayaldi said that man, his name is Amr ibn Shuraid, as narrated by Abu Hurairah, and his name is Abdullah ibn Rawaha, as clarified by Abu Hanifa in his Musnad, according to the Takhrij of Al-Harithi and Talha Al-Balkhi. Yes, Al-Balkhi. And Al-Khwarizmi. Al-Khwarizmi. So according to that is what was narrated in the hadith, that a man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a black slave woman and said, "It is obligatory upon me to free a believer. Is this slave woman sufficient?" Al-Bayaldi clarifies that the man was saying, "My mother died and ordered me to free a believing slave on her behalf," which that's different from Muslim's story. The story narrated by Muslim is that she was taking care of his sheep, and then while the sheep was in her care, a wolf took one. So he got angry and smacked her in the face. And then he told the Prophet, and the Prophet scolded him, and then he said, "Should I free her?" So the Prophet said, "Bring her to me." All of that adds to the inconsistency in this hadith. When we say in this hadith, we mean with its different versions. So the man was saying, "My mother died and ordered me to free a believing slave on her behalf, and I only have this slave woman." What was her case? She was a black foreign slave woman. That's not racist, by the way. Who did not even know about the prayer. The man was saying, "Is this slave woman sufficient for fulfilling the will?" This is as was mentioned in the Musannaf of Abdul Razzaq. And there is no authentic narration that she was a mute, as was said. And it was said that she was a mute. Abu Hanifa said, "So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to her, 'Are you a believer?' She said, 'Yes.' And so he said to her, when she answered him, 'Yes,' he said to her, 'Ain Allah?' So she pointed to the sky." Al-Bayaldi said, the fifth point is that she was not Arabian. She was unable to clearly express what was in her heart in reference to the creed of Tawheed, of monotheism, the creed of monotheism, with a proper expression. That's the significance of saying she's a black slave woman. Means she's foreigner. According to that, gives more plausibility to the fact that she can't express herself clearly here. So by pointing, she made it known that the one whom she worships is the God of the sky, because they used to refer to Allah as Ilahu Sama, the God of the sky. Not because he's in the sky. This is what the Prophet's question refers to, as well as his being content with the pointing, as in that book Al-Kifaya by Nuruddin al-Bukhari. It's not the same Bukhari. It's not the famous one, you know. You might think it is, that is. It's not the one, it's not the Bukhari you might think it is. And so he said, "Free her, for she is a believer." Al-Bayaldi said, Abu Hanifa hinted at the answer to show that the question and the acceptance do not refer to the place by a direction, because of the definite evidence that discredits the confirmation of Allah being in an actual place. But our Shaykh, he says this is problematic here, because he said she's a believer for something that doesn't constitute validating belief, for something that doesn't validate belief. If one of them, those Wahhabis, says, or any likeners in the past, if they said you are inferring a meaning different from the common meaning, you're making a ta'wil, and this is prohibited, then we ask him about the hadith of Al-Bukhari, Rabbuhu baynahu wa bayna qiblatih. The most common meaning of the words is one's Lord is between him and his qibla. The literal implication being that Allah is on earth. So how do you explain this hadith, Wahhabi? He will make ta'wil for it. And this is narrated by Al-Bukhari, so it's stronger. He would not interpret this text by its literal meaning, although he's dispraising us for doing that. And if he does, he would be contradicting himself. And we can say to him, when you said it means he's over the heavens, then you are the one who's inferring a meaning different from the common meaning. and Allah knows best. So we'll stop there. We're still under the chapter that Allah exists without a place. We still have a few more points to cover. The issue of ma, being with. What does that mean to say God be with you, for example? Also, some texts that refer to who's in the sky, men fi sama, who's in the sky, that's the angels. But those different texts, they say men, who's in the sky? So according to the Wahhabis means Allah. So we still need to address that too. And then we'll move on from there. And you might see here, what about the Hadith of Nuzul? Hadith of Nuzul, the Hadith of descent, where they say Allah descends down to the sky. We already briefly addressed that, not in detail. We briefly addressed that when we talked about the Muhkam and Mutashabi texts. So there is a mentioning for the Hadith of Nuzul in this book, but not in detail. But if you want details, you can look in the book, How to Debate the So-Called Salafiyya. Wallahu a'lam. You said, what prevents a Wahhabi from saying these are different hadith about different situations, thus not inconsistent? Nothing prevents them from that. They say that. And the answer to that requires some knowledge, though. But scholars addressed it, like Al-Kawthari. Al-Kawthari said, this attempt is not true, and then he has answer for it. But I don't have answer for it. So what they're saying, though, is there's many cases when somebody didn't know if he should free his slave woman. So he would go to the Prophet and say, should I free this slave woman? And then every time the Prophet would say, where's Allah? Where's Allah? Where's Allah? I think when you put it just that way, it doesn't seem very feasible. It seems to me not feasible. Ameen wa fikum. Subhanallah. So that's their belief then. That their belief, those who would make this argument, is that there's numerous occasions here. Every time a Sahabi wanted to free a slave woman, he didn't know if he could. So he would go to the Prophet to ask if he could free the slave woman. Never about a slave man, only about a slave woman. And she's a black slave woman in many of those. And the Prophet's standard way to test this is to ask her, where's Allah? This is very strange. Wa subhanallahi wa bihamdihi.